Hey friends, it's Masood. Welcome back to Med School Moose. This video is going to be on how to answer a USMLE question. If you are brand new to the channel, welcome. My name is Masood Muhammad. I am a board certified emergency medicine physician, and I create a lot of high yield content for medical students and residents, including USMLE and COMLEX prep. So be sure to subscribe to my channel to receive all of my latest videos, and be sure to watch this video to the end because we will be breaking down an actual USMLE question to make sure that you guys are put in the best position to answer them. This is a video that I've been wanting to make for a really long time. I've been creating a lot of high-yield USMLE and COMLEX content, but I really wanted to slow things down a little bit and kind of talk through how I approach USMLE and board exam questions in general, and share that information with you guys so that you can understand how to better answer these questions. Some of these suggestions might not work for everyone, but I'm hoping that if you're watching this video, you can get a little bit of information on how to better answer these questions so that you are more prepared on test day. Real quick before we get started, if you are studying for the USMLE, COMLEX, or residency exams, TrueLearn has your back with their amazing smart banks. TrueLearn smart banks have a lot of amazing features, including thousands of expertly created questions and deep analytics so that you can understand where your weaknesses are, where your strengths are, and how to improve before test day. So definitely check this out. Use promo code MOOSE25 for $25 off a smart bank subscription of 90 days or greater. I will leave the link for that in the description below. Be sure to check it out. I've been using TrueLearn since I was studying for my own board exams, and they have just been getting better and better and better since then. So definitely something that I recommend if you're studying for those exams. That being said, let's jump into it, how to answer a USMLE question. The first thing that I think is important when it comes to answering these USMLE board style questions is understanding the format. And what I mean by that is you want to understand exactly what the exam looks like. For USMLE Step 1, there are 7 60-minute blocks, and there's no more than 40 questions per block. There may be a little bit less. Sometimes they're experimenting with questions. There may be 38, 39, but there's going to be no more than 40. So if we assume that there is 40 questions per each of these blocks, we do a little bit of mental math, that works out to about 90 seconds per question. And if you're taking USMLE Step 2 CK, it is actually 8 60-minute blocks. Same thing, no more than 40 questions per block, same math, about 90 seconds per question. The reason I think this is so important is because as you are studying for these board exams and as you are doing questions blocks, you want to develop an internal clock about how long these questions are taking you so that you can understand when you're spending too much time on a question to make an educated guess and to move on. So I just want to display that. You're thinking about 90 seconds per question. Obviously, some questions will take a little bit less. Some questions might take a little bit more. We don't want to stare at the clock the entire time. But as you're doing questions, develop that internal clock and know when you need to not get stuck on a question and start moving on. So now, what are these steps to actually approaching a USMLE or a COMLEX board style question? The first thing that I recommend is reading the question at the end first. Typically, these questions have two parts, the stimulus and the stem. The stimulus is the first part, that's the clinical vignette that kind of lays the background, gives all the information, and the stem is the actual question at the end. And the reason why I think it's so helpful to read the question that's at the end first, to read that stem first, is because that's going to help you understand the main goal of the question, what it's testing you on, what it's trying to get at. So for example, for a Step 1 question, that stem at the end, that question might be which of the following is the most likely diagnosis. And just from reading that, you can know that this is something having to do with pathology. You're going to have to diagnose a disease as opposed to something asking about a biochemical pathway or asking about biostatistics. Another example for a Step 1 question might be which of the following is the most likely embryologic origin of this patient's condition. And just by reading that stem at the end, you're getting a lot of information. You know they're probably not talking about cardiology or microbiology or something like that. It's asking you about embryology. So just reading that, you can kind of gear your mind towards what you're going to be asked and kind of pull that relevant information forward into your brain. For Step 2, some of the question styles are the same. You might still get that which of the following is the most likely diagnosis. And in that case, you're going to want to hone in on the pathology again. But then there are other question styles on Step 2 CK, such as which of the following is the most appropriate next step in management. So when you see questions like that, you can already start thinking in your head, all right, I need to diagnose what this condition is, and I need to figure out, what the next step in treating it is going to be. So that's why I like to read the question at the end first, because that allows me to kind of narrow things down and get a better understanding of what I need to be looking for to make the diagnosis or to answer that question when I'm reading the stimulus. The next thing that we want to do after reading that question at the end, after reading that stem, is reading the answer choices. And I think that this is helpful because it allows you to familiarize yourself with the options that are there to kind of narrow things down even further. So for example, if we're reading that question stem at the very end, that might read as cardiovascular examination is most likely to show which of the following. So just by reading that, it's talking about cardiology, it's talking about physical exam skills, And if you read the answer choices, it might show you, various heart murmurs or something like that. And you can already know I'm being asked about cardiology, I'm being asked about heart murmurs. So when I go back to the question, I can be looking for things that'll kind of help me to identify which of these is the correct murmur. So by doing it this way, this step-by-step process, we're really kind of narrowing in on the specific knowledge that we need to answer this question. After we've read the question stem at the end, and after we've read the answer choices, now I like to go back and read the stimulus. And of course, this is the area that's going to give you a lot of context. It's going to be the history of the patient, or it's going to be, more of a general question. Some questions are just the stem at the end by themselves. But we're going to read the stimulus, get all of the important information. And as we're reading, we're going to highlight that critical information, right? I think highlighting is important for two reasons. Obviously, it's going to allow the information to stand out a little bit better if you use the highlighting function when you're answering these questions. But also later on in the exam, once you're several hours in, your brain's going to get tired. You're going to be a little bit less engaged. It's going to be a little bit harder to focus. So by being actively engaged, using the highlighting function, having to move your mouse and highlight things, that's going to keep you a little bit more engaged so that you make sure you're not missing anything. And of course, highlighting is useful to identify critical information, looking for buzzwords. So for example, if we're doing a question regarding cardiology and it says something in the stimulus about crescendo, decrescendo murmur, that's a big buzzword. We want to highlight that because that could be signaling something like aortic stenosis, and that may be the answer to the question, or that may be relevant to getting to the answer. So we really want to be highlighting so that we can identify these buzzwords. And of course, if you haven't checked it out yet, be sure to watch my USMLE Step 1 Buzzwords video series. I'm going to link part 1 right here. Be sure to check that out after this video so that you can start better identifying those buzzwords. All right, now after we've read the stimulus and we've highlighted critical information, we're going to start narrowing down the answer choices. Typically with these questions, there's 5 answer choices. There's one of them that's the correct answer. There's 2 or 3 distractors, and then there's one that you're going to be kind of on the fence of. And this is where you're going to combine your analysis of the question, your reading of the question, all the information you highlighted, and your medical knowledge. So the reason why I think it's important to approach it this way is because you're going to be able to narrow down answer choices based on what you read. And of course, you want to read these questions carefully, especially at the end. It might say something like, which of the following is the most likely diagnosis? Which is the next best step in management? What is the gold standard test for diagnosis? You really want to be honing in on those things because, like we said, one of those is a correct answer. One of them might be a little bit on the fence. So by reading the question, knowing one of these is more likely, one of these is better than the other, that's how you're going to get that correct answer. And then finally, like we talked about in the beginning, as you're doing this, you want to be checking your internal clock. Really, all of the steps that we just talked about ideally should take somewhere about 20 to 30 seconds, maybe a little bit less if you're a fast reader, maybe a little bit longer if you're a slower reader, and that's okay. But you want to check your internal clock because if it's taking too long, if you're getting greater than that 90 seconds, you're up to 2-3 minutes on a question, you really want to take note of that. You want to make an educated guess as best as you can, mark the question, and move on, because this one question doesn't determine the entire test. We want to make sure that we're answering every single question. And if you're taking too long on one, you're going to put yourself in a bad position and you're going to have to rush later. And we definitely don't want that. So now that we have all of that information, let's break down an actual USMLE question and figure out how to answer it. So here's the question. Remember, part 1, we're going to start with the stem first. We're going to read the question at the end first. And that is, which of the following parts of the history should the physician obtain more information about? So just reading that part, we can already know that it's asking us about the HPI. It's asking us about something specific within the HPI that's going to help us make the diagnosis for this patient. So we've read that question, we've read that stem at the end. Now we're going to move on to the answer choices. We see A is substance abuse, B is travel, C is use of over-the-counter medication, D is occupational exposure, and E is type of home heating. So we know that these answer choices are all important parts of an HPI, and in this case, there might not be necessarily anything that we can easily narrow down because it's a little bit general, but now we have some familiarity with things that we want to be looking for when we get back up here. So now that we've read the question stem at the end, now that we've read the answer choices, we can go back and read the stimulus. So let's do that. A 21-year-old male presents to the emergency department in the winter due to headache, nausea, and dizziness for 4 hours. He denies any fevers, chills, or shortness of breath. He also denies any medical problems. The patient states that he lives in the basement of a 3-story house. He endorses smoking 1 pack of cigarettes daily. Physical exam is unremarkable. Which of the following parts of the history should the physician obtain more information about? So there's a lot of information there to break down. I don't have a highlighting function on this PowerPoint, but as we're reading that question, as we're reading that stimulus, we want to be highlighting. And there are a few important things here that we should note and that we should be highlighting. One thing that you want to be thinking about as you're looking at these questions and as you're trying to answer these questions is, why is the question maker putting specific details in here? So going back through the question, we can see that it's a 21-year-old presenting in winter. They specifically mention that it's winter. They specifically mention that he has no underlying medical problems. And they specifically mention that he's in the basement of a 3-story house and that he is a smoker. Those are things that are very interesting, things that kind of stand out in this question. So we want to be highlighting some of those things to kind of make that stand out more, because that's going to lead us to our answer choice. Now, there's kind of 2 different things that can happen after going through that process and reading all the answer choices. So the first thing that might happen is that you know this answer, right? The symptoms are suspicious for carbon monoxide poisoning. That's the ultimate diagnosis here. The fact that he's in the basement, it's a 3-story house, and it's the wintertime puts him at increased risk. And additionally, the fact that he's a smoker, right? Potentially he could be smoking in that basement for all we know. But even if we don't assume that, there are a lot of other sources of carbon monoxide, gas heaters, furnaces, those kinds of things that put this patient at increased risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. So the answer here is E, the type of home heating. If we know that, great, but what if we don't know the answer immediately? Now how are we going to kind of approach this? This is when we need to start narrowing down the answer choices. So we can use some information from the STEM and from the stimulus to kind of start doing that. One thing that I see that we can immediately start narrowing down is it's probably not C. It's probably not use of over-the-counter medication. Why is that? Because the stimulus specifically told us that he does not have any medical problems. So if he doesn't have any medical problems, he's probably not taking any medication. So C is probably out. The other thing that's important to note here is that there is an acute onset of these symptoms, right? This just started for the past 4 hours. So things like travel and occupational exposure, answer choices B and D, are probably also not the case. It mentions nothing about travel, nothing about him traveling outside of the country or going to a specific area or anything like that. It doesn't mention his occupation, and you would presume that if it was an occupational exposure, this is something that would be happening, intermittently, chronically, not just for the past 4 hours. So far, we've kind of eliminated answer choices B, C, and D. So that leaves us with choices A and E. So like we already said, we know that choice E is the correct answer, but A could also potentially be a correct answer. So how are we going to kind of figure this part out? I think there are 2 things that are important to keep in mind here. First of all, substance use is a possibility, but the question isn't giving you anything to suggest that, right? It says that the physical exam is unremarkable, so you can't assume that this patient was taking anything. If we were concerned about substance use, the question would say something regarding that. For example, if we were concerned about an opioid overdose, it would say that he's, breathing very shallowly and he has pinpoint pupils or something like that. If we were concerned about an amphetamine overdose, it would say that he's really tachycardic or diaphoretic. But the physical exam is unremarkable. And we know that that can occur with carbon monoxide poisoning. So for that reason, substance use is not the correct answer, and the correct answer choice is E, type of home heating. So just to recap, when we're approaching these USMLE or these COMLEX or these board style questions, we want to read the question STEM at the end first. We want to read the answer choices, kind of start honing in on what the question's asking us. Then we want to go all the way back to the top and read the stimulus, highlight the important information as we go. We want to start to eliminate answer choices, find the one that's correct. And as we're doing all of this, we want to develop an internal clock, know when we're taking too long in a question to make a guess and to move on. I know this may sound a little bit scary, it might sound a little bit complicated, but trust me, if you're doing your questions and you're consistent with it and you're using this process, it will get easier and easier, and you will find that you are answering questions at a much higher level of efficiency than you were before. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you found value in this video, be sure to subscribe to receive all of my latest videos. Click here on the left to watch USMLE Step 1 High Yield Images, and click here on the right to watch USMLE Step 1 Buzzwords. Thank you again for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.